Welcome to Lightways at Lifeastrologer with me, Anna Isabel. I'm an astrologer, and I am so happy because Marcos Patchett is back, and he is a wonderful, rare breed of medical astrologer herbalists. So welcome, Marcos.
Hi, welcome, Anna. Thank you, Anna. I'm really excited to be talking to you again. We had a really fun chat last time, and sort of felt like it was truncated prematurely. So thank you.
Well, I thought it would be lovely today to hear about the herbs themselves, and or some of the herbs themselves. Obviously, can't talk about all of them.
Well,
And,
yeah.
and perhaps planetary associations and sign associations.
Sure.
So where would you begin?
I mean, that's a big area. So let's maybe talk about a specific. So first of all, let's maybe talk about why planets and were matched with herbs. I mean, I don't know whether we talked about this last time or not.
You did not, so I think this is great.
Okay, that's groovy. So, well, I mean, and first of all, just in terms of the general lexicon of astrology, things were generally on the basis of their nature, how they acted in the world, how they appeared. They were given different rulerships. They were assigned to different planets. So different planets were symbolized those things. So if they were pleasant or attractive or in some way associated with pleasure, then that would be a Venus thing. If they were sort of malodorous or a bit disgusting tasting and or looking and possibly toxic and maybe quite aged, they would be linked with Saturn. And if they were in some way really helpful and totally harmless and conducive to good health and maybe expanded your awareness of things or things like that, there'd be Jupiter-y things. So that it really is just that sort of whole rulership thing was just a classification thing. So broadly speaking, all plants, the whole plant kingdom was put under the moon. So plants in general as a class are all moon, because the moon rules things which are sort of cyclical, which wax and wane. The moon was the astrological symbol for the physical body, also water, and just sort of like the general, literally vegetative growth, vegetative meaning of greenery, but also, and this is, I'm going to make a controversial statement, sort of like mindless growth, as in like just now, we're not going to get into theories of consciousness here, because obviously I believe plants have their own form of consciousness, as do we. They are not actually mindless. I don't think most things are mindless. We're living in a giant matrix of consciousness, in my view. But if you're talking about, do they have sort of intents in the human sense, then maybe not. And they certainly don't have their level of consciousness is different from that of humans. I'm not going to say it's inferior because I believe that, but I think it's different. So anyway, plants were under the moon. And then, but in terms of, obviously, plants is a very broad category. So you can have spiny plants, you can have soft, woolly, fluffy plants, you can have plants that live in water, you can have plants that live in the desert, you can, so all different characters. So then you'd have, those plants would be classified under different planets. And then as a sort of tertiary level of classification, you could then put those planets into signs. So the signs are like the clothing that the planet wears. So you could have, generally speaking, all plants that were put under Venus would be in some way maybe pleasant, in some ways maybe attractive, in some ways maybe they produce tasty fruit, for example, generally benign, at least as far as their relations with humans go, because astrology is a human invented and therefore human centric art, obviously. So it's going to be from a human perspective. So Venus-y plants would be those in that category. But then you've got interesting nuances like that. So you might have a Venusian plant, like say a rose, which is just beautiful and smells beautiful, but it has thorns. So on the stem, and they're quite fussy, they're quite hard to grow, roses. So I would have maybe put roses as Venus in Capricorn, which is interesting. Some people say Venus in Taurus because it's a super strong Venus, but I think the fussiness of the rose, when you actually grow them, they're really hard to grow actually. They need a lot of work, and the spininess, the prickles on the stems. And if you've ever grown roses, you'll know they love sulfur. Now that's not a Taurus thing. Roses love sulfur. They grow really well when you feed them sulfur. That's a Capricorn thing, because Capricorn, the sign of Capricorn was traditionally said to be ruled by Saturn, and it was Mars's exaltation. So it's liking, it's things that may be hard work, which is the Saturn-y element of it, and they're a bit fussy and tricky to grow. That's all Saturn-y. And then they're spiny and they like sulfur, and that's Mars, but they're still totally Venus, which is, you know, and Venus in Capricorn was said to have some dignity, has some power there. So that's a bit controversial, but traditionally, to give you a clearer example, something like brambles was assigned to Venus. Now you think brambles, Venus, but Culpeper has a great line on this. Culpeper, our sort of favorite 17th century maverick astrologer apothecary, he said, if anyone asks why she is so prickly, tell them it is because she is in the house of Mars. So he assigned brambles to Venus in Aries. And why would it be Venus to start with? Well, first of all, it's a really benign plant. It produces edible fruit. Everybody knows blackberrying. It's actually in the rose family. Like if you've seen the flowers of bramble, they're like little rose flowers. It's not toxic. It's actually, you know, you can eat it, you make tea out of it. It's pretty benign. But it's in the house of Mars. It's in Aries. Why did he assign it to Aries? Well, I think because it's super fast growing and it's invasive. You know, they grow like an inch a day and they're spiky.
Hey, they're out to conquer the world, brambles.
Yeah, totally.
I very well.
Totally, exactly. But they are also kind of benign and useful, and they are associated with a sort of Venusian things of sort of joy. And then in terms of their, because of blackberrying, you know, if you've grown a kind of brambles, everyone's got memories of blackberrying as kids or whatever, just, you know, eating them in summer and stuff. They're generally a happy thing. And then you've got its medical uses, where it was an astringent, so it was used for things like diarrhea. But Culpeper said it was especially useful for sores in the gums and mouth, and also in the private parts. Now, the gums and mouth would also, that's Aries, rules the head traditionally, and the private parts, I think that's what, this is all getting a bit astrologically technical and geeky, but Manilius, this Roman astrologer, talked about signs which were like engirdling, which means like engirdling, which means ruled by the same planet. So traditionally that would be Aries and Scorpio. So Culpeper's here saying, yeah, brambles are good for sores in the mouth and sores in the private parts, because they're both Mars ruled bits of the body sort of thing. So it's fascinating. So in other words, all these examples just to say the essential nature of a plant will, like whether it's good or bad or happy or sad or whatever, will determine what planet it's ruled by. But then how it acts will sort of nuance that, you know?
So you were talking about roses, and yeah. I get the link with Capricorn, but then wild roses are not fussy. So
no.
With them,
yeah, that's an interesting one. I mean, like obviously the Capricorn one, that is just my own speculation, because in the traditional texts you will find that while there is agreement on the classification of a lot of different plants, like you won't find anyone disagreeing with the fact that nettles are ruled by Mars, or, you know, because it's so bloody obvious. Right? Because they literally friggin' sting you. But then there's, or like mustard is Mars, or, you know, there's some things are they declare themselves very obviously. Slow bushes were ruled by Saturn because their berries are black and they're really astringent and they're drying and binding and whatever. And they're called blackthorn, right? So I mean, it's clearly Saturn. So some things are very obvious, but between others, and I am circling towards a point here, that there between others there were discrepancies. So you'll find in some herbals, for example, some herbalists say mullein, which is a nice herb that we use for the lungs and for diarrhea and sometimes for bone and joint disorders, and sometimes it's an antiviral. It's an incredibly useful plant. Beautiful plant, actually, grows up really tall, has a like big head of yellow flowers on top of it, fluffy, soft leaves. Some herbalists said it was a herb of Jupiter, and others said it was a herb of Saturn. And you will find great discrepancy between authors there. And that is because it's not always that obvious, because one thing will sort of point you towards one direction and another thing will point you towards another. And even fewer herbalists went as far as to say this plant is that planet in that sign. So when you don't have an assignment, it can be quite tricky. It can be very tricky. You can take a lot of years of thinking about one plan just to kind of think, I know where this goes. You know what I mean? So to give you, so I think what was your initial question, Anna? You were asking about.
So I was asking you about how the plants, you know, that go with certain planets.
Yes.
But I love this because it's really interesting, because ultimately, although there's some agreement, because some plants you said are obvious, different people will interpret a plant in different ways.
Yeah.
And in fact, you know, you can interpret planets in different ways too.
Yes. Yeah,
because
absolutely.
The notion that Saturn is only a malefic, you know, kind of denies
yes, the utility. Well, kind of, yes, and also no. Yes, and also no. So in the tradition is not without its nuance. It really depends who you read. And I think, you know, also, I think something I point to often, there's a huge difference in tone and style between modern and traditional authorships. So in the tradition, they would always give the most extreme examples of things to help you remember them, and I guess because that was how they taught. And in the modern, they'll do the opposite. They'll try to give the nuance right from the get-go. So the traditional authors would say Saturn in this sign produces grand plagues and deaths and the destruction of kings and nations, and in this sign it produces monarchs and people who rule the world and blah blah. And what they're not, it's not literally saying that always happens when this is there. It's sort of giving a really extreme example to help you remember it, and then trusting that information will be read in the context of everything else. So I think that sometimes it's a bit of a stylistic difference that can trip people up. But to your point about planets being not all one thing, absolutely. And yeah, the Saturn as a malefic. I mean, in fact, coming back to the plants, for me as a herbalist and using the plants, it's the best practical way of seeing this in action. Your malefic plants are no more or less malefic than any other plant. They're just as bloody useful, in some cases more so, you know? So, I mean, obviously, like if it's a plant of Saturn or Mars, it's more likely to be toxic. It's more likely to be spiny, but it's more likely to be a little bit, you know, of a scary plant, like a witch's garden plant, you know? But on the other hand, those plants are often extremely useful medicinally. Like if you think about wolfsbane, a nice herb of Saturn, which is deadly poisonous, you know, if you pick it, you rub it between your fingers, you can take your pulse and feel your pulse slowing down, because the aconite in it, the alkaloids in it absorb directly through the skin. And if you take it orally, it's a very powerful poison. But used externally, we can use it in ointments and stuff as a very powerful nerve numbing agent. So it's brilliant for nerve pain as an anti-neuralgic. It's just fantastic. So and even the more benign ends of the Saturn herb spectrum, like comfrey, we now know comfrey produces these alkaloids called pyrrolizidines, which if you ingest comfrey over a long period of time will F up your liver, you know, which is a very Saturn-y thing to do. Have I lost you, Anna? Are you still there?
I am still here, but you've so, but I'm still here. You're back. That's lovely.
Great. Okay, yeah, no, I was just saying, have I lost you? I think the internet went a bit wonky. Yeah, so I was where did I drop out? Was I talking about comfrey?
You were talking about comfrey, yes.
All right, cool. Yeah, so saying it's a more benign Saturn-y plant, but even that has these pyrrolizidine alkaloids in it, which if you ingest it over a long period of time, really depending on what type of comfrey, because some types are much lower in these alkaloids than others, but that they can cause liver problems or even predispose you to cancer. But it's an amazingly useful plant, like it used by gardeners to create green manures and green mulches and stuff like that, used by herbalists for spinal problems. That you know all about this because we talked about comfrey last time, how amazing it can be for musculoskeletal problems. It's just magic. So it's absolutely malefic, benefic. These are relative terms. And again, it comes back to that human-centric thing. From a human point of view, the anything classified under Jupiter or Venus, or events occurring under Jupiter or Venus, they're more like getting an invite to a party or a free gift or, you know, some money. And anything that happens under Mars or Saturn might be like going to the gym or getting a bill. You know, the second category of things is much less objectively enjoyable, but are they less important? Are they less valuable to us ultimately? No, we just don't enjoy them as much, you know? So it's that those categories, the names benefic and malefic, I don't want to get rid of them. I think they have value because it helps you to remember, is this thing going to be fun or not, you know? But on the other hand, I totally agree that you shouldn't take them as value statements, because they're not actual statements of value. They're statements of quality, of the sort of qualitative element, how we enjoy it. Do you know what I mean?
I do, because I always think of things as, in fact, I find myself when I'm working with clients or students using the words pleasant.
Yes, or unpleasant. Yes.
Rather than, you know, malefic, or benefic, or any other value kind of words. Stressful, not stressful, challenging.
Yes. Yeah.
Those are words that I use because I think they convey the meaning of what we are attempting to give more clearly. Rather, so it's avoiding the value of good or bad.
Definitely.
It's enjoyable, not enjoyable. So you and I are very much working along the same lines. And, you know, anyone who has made comfrey tea for their plants knows it. I did it today. I was feeding my pumpkins and my fish tree today with comfrey tea, comfrey soup. And I tell you, I open up that bucket and it hits you. In fact, just before I opened it, you know, I was thinking I should brace myself for, you know, the attack that's about to happen on my nostrils.
Yeah.
It's really the only thing that really loves it is flies. Yeah.
Yes. And so that's a Saturn rulership right there. I mean, just, yeah.
So I when I'm taking the leaves out and I throw them onto the soil, because they inevitably that there's goodness in them, so that's
sure
soil there as well. But within minutes, flies are all around it. As I'm taking, you know, the liquid to dilute to put on the actual plants that I'm going to feed. So there's no question that this is not a plant that
it's not pleasant. It's not pleasant. Yeah. But is it useful? Is it helpful? It's freaking amazing, right?
It's so helpful that I let it do what it wants on my plot. I just trim it back when I need to fill up. I've got 3 of these huge tubs, which I fill up so that I've always got comfrey
tea on hand. Yes.
On hand for my plants. So, and in fact, I bought one specifically for my plot. At the time, in fact, I had 2 plots. I bought 2 because I needed to have one on each plot. I wouldn't be without it for.
That's amazing. All right. Well, you've inspired me, Anna, because I've only got my little London garden and I've never grown comfrey in it. So I might just like start growing it just for that, because it's like definitely my soil needs a tonic at the moment.
Word of warning, if you're going to do that and you only have a small garden, you might have it in a pot.
Yeah, so it's contained, so it doesn't just take over.
it does take over, and then give it a regular haircut, because
Okay.
it,
Noted. Thank you.
and be sure that the you don't let it seed, because it's also very generous.
All right. I mean, my garden is just filled with medicinal weeds, so it'll have some heavy competition. So, you know, it'll have to fight
It
off
will,
the teasels and the brambles and, like, you know, all my
yeah.
other, like, so like other people just look at my garden and go, what? Do you know what I mean? It's like, yes, these are all deliberate. These are on purpose.
Well, you can add comfrey into the mix, but be warned,
yes, thank you.
it
Noted.
needs containment, because
All right.
and deadheading,
Okay.
because and you know the other wonderful use of it, the bees adore it.
That's interesting. That's very interesting. I mean, this is why classifying a plant is not always easy, because bees are very much a Jupiter-y thing, you know, but I would say comfrey on the whole is probably a Saturn in Capricorn plant, just because of its use for the bones and the skeleton and whatever.
Oh, bone.
Yeah, it's called knitbone, literally one of its traditional names. So it's definitely a Capricornian, but the bees thing is, you know, it's a bit of a curveball. So if you were to over prioritize that would make it tricky. So I mean, I think I have seen some old herbals who've classified it as a herb of Jupiter. To me, it's clearly Saturn, just because of its medicinal use, and as you say, the use in the gardening as a mulch, and all of that's very Saturn. So,
well, perhaps you can assign it to Saturn in Sagittarius then.
maybe, yeah. This is all Saturn in Pisces, one of the 2 Jupiter ruled domains, possibly. I mean, this is where it gets really interesting, because you will find divergence between authors. And what I found in the use of this, the practical use of this, as a gardener, there could be other uses of it that I haven't really thought of, but as a herbalist, the use is really, really clear, in that when you have a medical chart, there are certain traditional rules, like you want to strengthen the rule of the ascendant. So the ascendant will be represented by a particular planet. So say you've got Libra rising, you will use plants or treatments of Venus. So you need to know which plants are Venus-y. Or again, another traditional rule is, if you have the 10th ruler in a chart, in a consultation chart, the 10th house represents medicine. If that planet is strong in the chart, you want to use herbs represented by that planet. So say you had Capricorn on the cusp of the 10th, and Saturn in the chart was in Aquarius or Capricorn or Libra and direct and very strong, you might want to use Saturn plants. And then there are more rules, but you get the idea. So this is used within a live tradition of astrology to help narrow down the selection of remedies. So you need to know what the rulerships are for that. But I think that takes second place to what the humoral diagnosis is traditionally, or in a modern sense, what's actually physiologically going on. So you can't just sling any old herb of Venus at somebody. You've got to know what the pathology is, what's actually going on with them. And then if there's a herb of Venus that is appropriate to that, say the patient is overheated, they have an excess of choler traditionally, and maybe in a modern sense, maybe they've just got a fever, maybe they've got COVID, or maybe they've got flu or something, whatever. Then you might use a Venus plant that clears choler traditionally, and in a modern sense is antiviral. And that's, so for something like that, elderberry, fantastic, off we go. There, you know, sorted. Venus tree clears choler, antiviral, boom, done. So sometimes it's as simple as that, and other times it's tricky. And obviously these variations in classification make it a bit tricky. So I always think, just one of my favorite quotes is the Culpeper quote: keep your brains, I mean, this is my portmanteau of it. It's slightly longer, but it's basically, keep your brains in your head, not in your books. That's a Culpeper quote. So, which is fantastic, right? It's and because his basic, and Culpeper had a lot to say, ironically, because now he is part of the tradition. He had a lot of things to say about doctor experience and doctor tradition, and he would always say, listen to doctor experience, doctor tradition's an idiot. Basically, he spoke about loads of people about being led by the nose by tradition, as bears are led to the stake, which is hilarious because like in those days they had like dancing bears tied by their nose, so they're like treated horribly and whatever. So his idea is if you just go by tradition and don't use your brain, you might as well just be a little dancing bear being pelted with stones by a crowd in a public place. You're not, you know, you're not using your head, you're just being abused. so I mean, he was a great one for a very sort of sharp turn of phrase. But the point, therefore, is, I think, look at the pathology first, do use the classification, but don't be beholden to the traditional classifications, because some of them may be wrong, and maybe they're not always rigid categories. Maybe there's some context dependence to these things. So as we said, some plants, it's very obvious that they are belonging to a particular planet. Others, it's a bit more nuanced, it's a bit less clear. I try to sort of get a plant down to a planet and then into a sign if you can, but that's not always possible. So, you know, I've given the example of roses. Another one that I like to use is, I say, cannabis is probably a plant of Saturn in Pisces, I think, because it's, do you sort of see that one? It's like Saturn, because it's like traditionally it was hemp, it was used to, I mean, its relative hemp was used to make cords and sails and stuff like that. It's cooling, it's slightly narcotic, all of these were kind of like Saturn-y qualities, but it's in the sign that has strong Jupiter-Venus rulership, so it was used for pleasure. It sort of erodes reason, it sort of takes away Mercury a little bit. It's used for creative processes. It's sort of numbing, it's sort of dreamy. It's I don't know, I think of it as a very Saturn in Pisces plant. Also, and of course, it's grown hydroponically. There are lots, when you think about it more, there are sort of more connections that I think put it in that sort of watery domain of Venus and Jupiter, but it's still definitely a Saturn plant. Yeah.
We've talked about malefics and benefics, but not a word about Mercury or the sun. Or
well, let's not leave them out then. So you mean plants of Mercury, of the sun, of the moon. Well, solar plants are kind of not always obvious, but they are more obvious than others in the sense that they are often very striking. They're often very, like, the obvious ones have big yellow flowers. Like, they might as well just have a sign around their neck saying, I am a herb of the sun. Do you know what I mean? But
sunflowers.
Yeah, sunflowers, like hello, or St. John's wort, or calendula. Some of them are like obviously solar. They're just there. Other ones that are perhaps less obviously solar, but kind of might give you an idea, would be something like peonies. They're solar traditionally. You know, big flashy flowers. But then you've got things which aren't flashy flowers, but are regarded as solar. So solar herbs would be plants which medicinally strengthened vitality in some way, were generally thought to be hot or warming. So angelica would be a herb of the sun, which is interesting. If you ever taste it, it has that sort of like very slightly bitter, which was traditionally in the Western tradition, bitter was hot. Because it stimulates digestion. In the Chinese tradition, it's cool. That's a whole other subject, which we'll get onto on another day, I'm sure. But like the hot cold thing in the Western tradition, bitter was hot, and so angelica roots were a sort of bitter tasting. They make your tongue tingle, and they were used to drive off plagues and contagion. So those sort of plants which staved off illness, a lot of those were solar. And juniper berries were solar, and this is where it gets more tricky, because you think, they're kind of like, it's the aromaticalness of them that's solar. So a lot of the aromatic woods, like woody aromatic sort of, so bay leaves, angelica, juniper, I would say calamus root, Acorus calamus. I think all of these are probably solar because they have
rosemary.
Yes, rosemary is definitely solar. So that was rosemary, Culpeper put sun in Aries. So yeah, a lot of the very sort of piercing aromatics, you know, the ones, so frankincense was solar, for example. So the kind of aromatics that, you know, like lift you up a little bit, they would be seen to be solar. So, and their medicinal virtues often be hot, dry, anti-inflammatory, antiseptic, often antibacterial. But yeah, the classifications get a little bit more esoteric. So something like Jupiter, juniper berry, you'd say, okay, it could be the sun. It's not like, so herbs of the moon, they're a little bit easier to identify because they're often watery or fleshy with little white flowers, or they grow in water. They might just have lots of be succulents. Often succulents are often lunar. So one lunar plant is lilies, the Madonna lily, big white flower. Think, oh, it could be a herb of the sun because it's quite showy, but then it has the bulbs are sort of white and sort of palish and gummy and mucilaginous. So that's sort of like a lunar. Other lunar plants, wild lettuce or garden lettuce, lunar. Cucumbers, lunar. Interestingly, opium poppies were lunar, but opium itself, the sap that was distilled and boiled and black and narcotic, was often said to be ruled by Saturn. So that's a fascinating example, because you've got a plant that's ruled by the moon and a distillate, a byproduct that's ruled by Saturn. So I often put opium poppies as moon in Capricorn. I think they're moon in Capricorn because they're like, they'll comfort you at first, but then they'll demand sort of permanent slavery, and they'll tend to constipate you and bung you up, and they'll repress inflammation. They won't soothe it. They'll actively just put a lid on it, so it's a very, I think it's a moon in Capricorn plant. Habituating as well, which is a very moon word. But then opium was ruled by Saturn. And then other examples of more benign moon plants would be like purslane or lamb's lettuce, portulaca, very sort of fleshy plant. And I think aloe vera is a herb of the moon in Scorpio. It's definitely lunar, because if you cut open the aloe, all that gel in the middle, and it's used for burns, and it's also the outer part. The leaves are slightly spiny and tough, and in the outer part of the leaf you have that yellow, bright yellow, which is Mars's color, laxative with the emodin in it. So I'm sure that's moon in Scorpio. Like aloe, it's definitely a moon herb, but it's in Scorpio's livery, as it were.
I can see that as well, because the just the gel, it's white, but it's cooling. If you put the gel on, it's so cooling. Of course, that's one of the reasons why it would be used for herbs.
Yeah.
The opium poppies or oriental poppies made me smile because I adore them.
Yes.
Maybe that's moon in Capricorn. I don't think I'll tell you some of my experience with oriental poppies. They are allowed to do whatever they like. They can see themselves wherever they want.
Me too. I have the same attitude to them. They're beautiful.
And that's about it.
Yeah. No, just the shape of them and how they grow straight up, and then the way their heads sort of curl down. They're so Art Nouveau, aren't they? They're just
they're exquisite, and the size of them. The blooms are. In fact, all puppies I adore. They all have free reign, whatever they like on my plot. They taught me that they thrive and are much happier and will delight me far more if I just let them do what they want, instead of collecting seed and so right time. No, that doesn't work. They don't like it. There's a wildness to them.
Yeah, which is fascinating. I mean, that they were traditionally ruled by the moon in about every text that I've seen, but it's my guess that they would put them as moon in Capricorn. So I have moon in Capricorn as well, right? So we're both Cappy moons. So I put them as moon in Cappy just because Capricorn is an earth sign, and it's traditionally cold and dry and ruled by Saturn, and has a strong Mars rulership too. So that to me would be like, they're definitely lunar, because they're definitely, I mean, as they're lunar because of their white latex, because they will induce sleep, because they'll repress pain, they're cooling, all of that. But then they have that secondary sort of Saturn habituating binding effect, and even a martial effect, because if you give somebody, even though poppies were said to be cold and dry in the 4th degree, which in the humoral tradition was like the most extreme cold, because they're narcotic basically. So one above them was cucumbers, which don't knock you out at all, but were seen as quite cold, or wild lettuce, which was cold almost to the same degree as opium, but not quite. So they're a very interesting plant. But yeah, like you, I just like them for their beauty. I just think they're stunning plants. I don't know, have you ever seen the sort of Oh, I might be thinking of the poppy out of the Batman film, so that's made up. But there is a poppy, a blue poppy. I don't think
Oh
it's
yes,
Papaver. I think it's Meconopsis.
that's right. It's Meconopsis. It grows on acid soil.
Yes,
It's
beautiful. Yes, absolutely beautiful. So if anybody who's watching who's not a plant geek, do Google these plants because they are stunning. Like Meconopsis, these blue poppies. Just I can't remember the species name, but I don't know what planet they're ruled by, presumably the moon. But but this is the thing. Well, we don't know because different planets. So the rationale for the planetary rulership of a plant is always the essential nature of that plant, and that can be to do with its behavior pharmacologically when we ingest it, its habit of growth, its appearance, and its sort of so how does it grow, where does it grow, and how does it affect us if we ingest it. It's all because astrology, and I'll repeat this point, it's a human-centered art. So the classification is always based on how do those things interact with us as humans. How do we, and from our point of view, of course, because it's we devised the art of astrology, so it's always from that anthropocentric perspective. So poppies would be lunar, but I'm not sure about all poppies. So say, for example, the California poppy, a Schultzia, which has bright yellow flower, you know, it probably would be the moon because it's also sedative and also cooling, but I'm not sure. And it's an American from America, so it doesn't have that traditional thing. So you'd have to really sort of think about it over
maybe
the
it's a
time.
moon in Leo.
Yes, exactly.
So where does watercress fit in then? Because it's so
that's an interesting one because Culpeper assigns that to the moon because it's a herb that grows in water. Other herbalists I've seen assign it to Mars. So would this be a lunar herb in a martial sign or a martial herb in a lunar sign? Like, would it be something like Mars in Cancer, or would it be something like Moon in Scorpio? I don't know. I would tend to think it's probably the moon, because it is a water, as in the plant was ruled by the moon, because it is eaten as a vegetable, it grows in water, it's more sort of food grade, and these seem more lunar attributes, although there are one or two food grade Mars herbs like nettle, but they are the exception. You've got to cook the nettles first, you know what I mean? You can't just eat them raw unless you are particularly masochistic. So, you know, there's like the point here is it would, I think watercress is probably moon in a martial sign, perhaps moon in Aries or something, you know, to give it that sort of biting, peppery quality. Yeah.
You do know there are competitions, I think it's in the West Country, for people eating raw nettles.
Ha! I didn't know that, but okay, they can have fun doing that.
I've experienced that, I can imagine. I've had this thought. You know how we have the concept of mutual reception. What, I don't know if you can see where I'm going.
Yeah, I can. I will see a couple of different avenues,
where
but yes.
Where we're looking at plants that suit, like when we were talking about watercress, would it be that it's happy with both the moon and Mars, depending on what it's being used for?
So this is really interesting because I kind of know what you're getting at, and this I'll have to get a little bit technical for a second, but just so stay with us if anybody's not familiar with astrology or whatnot. Yeah, I can see sort of so what you're saying is if a plant is classified as belonging to a particular planet in a particular sign, does that therefore make, say for example, you had, say for the sake of argument, we classified watercress as a plant of moon in Aries, would it therefore necessarily fit well with a plant of Mars in Cancer? So say we found a Mars in Cancer plant, would it work? Would it maybe either grow well in the garden or work well in a prescription together with it or something like that? I would say that's a really interesting thing to play with, possibly, but it very much would depend. I would see that as secondary in the triage to what was going on in the actual chart of, like, say, the illness or whatever. And then my primary triage would be what's going on practically. What does this patient need? You know, that's the overriding. What's the physical issue that's actually happening? Which that will have the overriding veto on what sort of plants we can use. So, oh yeah, just because they need herbs of Mars and maybe the moon, maybe they've got Scorpio rising and we need to strengthen their stomach. Scorpio rising, we use Mars herbs. Maybe we need to strengthen their stomach, use herbs of the moon. Oh, look, we've got these two plants. We've got this watercress of, like, the moon in Aries, and we've got this other plant. I'm trying to think of a Mars in Cancer plant. I think tobacco might be Mars in Cancer, but probably not the best one to use for medicine. But like, you know, so say we've got another plant of Mars in Cancer, whatever. Oh, we don't just go straight to using that. We'd look at sort of, let's think of some herbs or medicines ruled by Mars and some medicines ruled by the moon that might be applicable to what's actually going on with that person. And then we'll look at the chart of the illness, say, if you're doing a bit of medical astrology, and we've already got that we want to use herbs of Mars and the moon from that chart. That chart might also give us some other clues. So say, for example, this is where I'm going to get technical. Say you had in that chart a really good reception between Mars and the moon. And I've seen this. So say you have a chart where this is an example of a chart I've seen where it was a chart of a person coming for a consultation. So the chart was about their consultation, and they were represented by Saturn in Scorpio in the 10th house. So I wanted to use some Saturn herbs for them because they were represented by Saturn. Saturn was their avatar in this situation. And then the 10th house, which represented medicine in the chart, was ruled by Mars in Libra. Now, normally that could mean medicine that was problematic or medicine that caused issues, because Mars sometimes causes issues. It's one of the other naughty planets. Saturn and Mars are both naughty sometimes. And in Libra, Mars was said to be in detriment traditionally. And this chart was a daytime chart because the person had visited me during the day, as most people do. So it was a Saturn. So Mars was in Libra. So Culpeper would say, or traditional authorities might say, use planets ruling the 10th house, representing the medicine, if they are strong. So say Mars had been in a strong sign like in Scorpio or in Aries or Capricorn, where it's in rulership or exalted, I would have gone straight for herbs ruled by Mars. But in this case, I still was like, I'm definitely going to use herbs of Mars and Saturn. Why? Because Saturn was in Scorpio in this chart and Mars was in Libra. So Libra is the exaltation of Saturn, and Saturn is in Scorpio, which is ruled by Mars. They had a very strong generosity. So I made the whole prescription up out of herbs of Saturn and Mars. So first of all, I looked at what was actually going on with them, which happened to be sort of panic attacks and loads of stuff. And it was interesting because the context of them getting ill in the first place was it was following this major surgery where they'd been pumped full of cortisone, and it was the being pumped full of cortisone that had triggered all these panic attacks and stuff that they kept getting afterwards. So it was the Mars that, so it was both cause and cure. The poison was the remedy in a sense, you know what I mean? So the chart was, as astrology does, it was showing you this thing was a problem, but herein also lies the answer. So if Mars had been messed up in that chart but had not had that generosity with the ascendant ruler, with the avatar of the patient, I would have totally avoided herbs of Mars. So that goes back to your initial question of, do these generosities matter? Yes, but I think they matter more in the context of the chart of a situation. But it's something I would bear in mind, but maybe as a third or fourth rung down in terms of what planet would I classify under that planet. And if, say, you had a planet that I classified as Venus in Leo, like motherwort, which is called Leonorus cardiaca. It's a Venus, nice, gentle Venus plant, but that which regulates, so helps with palpitations and stuff like that. So it was called cardiaca. So it's Venus in Leo. So that was Culpeper classified it as Venus in Leo. And then I might use it with a plant of Sun in Libra or Pisces or Taurus. So in any of the signs which Venus was strong, so that there was a generosity between them. That's a really cool idea, and that was where you were coming from. But I think that would be like that would be a third or fourth level of detail. It'd be much more important to look at what's going on, select the plants on that basis, and just use the chart as the primary filter. And then, does that make sense, Anna?
It does make sense. It makes
Okay.
a complete sense.
Okay.
We haven't mentioned Mercury.
I know, we've got to get to Mercury. Why am I not mentioning Mercury? What have I got against Mercury? So Mercury plants, those are, in a sense, the most interesting because they are the most, as you might expect with Mercury, the most diverse in form and function, I would say. But generally speaking, if one can ever generalize with Mercury, they are often like plants where they can often be aromatic, like plants of the sun, but they're often like smaller, and like when in appearance they'll produce lots more seeds, and they'll kind of tend to be more branched and like sort of so that they'll have spindlier forms. In terms of their medicinal effect, they'll often be appropriated to the nervous system or to getting rid of wind. Now, this is interesting because wind can mean bloating and farting and burping, but in the traditional sense, it can also mean nervous tics and twitches and cramps and things like that, because wind was seen as a sort of neurological thing as much as it was like, so wind, if you think about, you know, the phrase like if you pull a face like that and the wind changes, you'll stay like that. Do you know what I mean? It's kind of like it's a neurological thing as well as so mercurial plants sometimes have action on the nervous system, sometimes have action as sort of like on the digestive system, and sometimes both. So like valerian, for example, is a traditional mercury herb, very stinky mercury herb. That's I quite like it though. I like the smell of it. It's sort of like have you smelt, you know, valerian root?
Oh no, not the root.
Okay. So the root that cats go mad for, it's well, some cats do. It sort of smells like old socks, really, but it was used in perfumery at one time. So it does. So it's definitely aromatic in a sense. And the plant is like a lot of the, not all, but many of them umbelliferae are mercurial. So I think like fennel, caraway, dill, carrots, celery, they're all mercury ruled. So if you think about the plants, you know, they branch and they're sort of like they have that sort of like branching thing, and often it's the seeds that we use primarily.
And this are carried in the wind as well, those.
In some, yeah, yes, yeah, that's true. I don't think in all, but yeah, that just it made me think of a tangent that we haven't covered in terms of the taxonomy of plants. I said that all plants were ruled by the moon in general. Different parts of the plants were ruled by different planets as well. So, but in terms of selecting planets for like treatment, you would say you're going to be using a herb like a plant, then you would pick a plant ruled by a particular planet. So this is often a level of detail that you don't necessarily need to know, except maybe in really specific random astrological context. But so generally the root would be ruled by Saturn, because it's the bit underground. So that's kind of obvious. The leaves would be ruled by the moon, I think. Yeah. The flowers would be Venus, because they're the sexual organs of the plant. The fruit would be Jupiter. The seed would be Mercury. And I think the stem is Mars. I think I'd have to check that. So, but definitely seed Mercury, fruit Jupiter, which is very interesting because they're like seed is within the fruit. And then the flower is Venus. That's the most obvious one, I think. Where's the sun? I've just thought, where's the sun in that? Don't know, the sun's missing. I'll have to check my taxonomy because like the sun is it should be in there somewhere, because the sun might be just the life force of the planet or something, but in terms of the structure of the plant, because generally the moon rules bodies and the sun rules vitality. So it's like in the same way that a mirror reflects light, the body was seen as the physical reflection and container of the life force. So the sun is, I mean, the sun in physical bodies is also said to rule the heart and the circulation, but I think it's because the heart was the seat of the life force traditionally, sort of thing. So, but I don't know.
Sap.
Sap. Yes, moon would definitely be sap. Yes, as well. Yeah, good call. So, but I'm pretty sure it's the foliage too. So definitely the moon would be the sap of the plant. because the moon ruled the humors in the human body. So, but to go back to Mercury herbs, I mean, just other examples of Mercury herbs we've got. So lavender is a Mercury herb. So that's a good example of, again, a plant that is nervous system action, because it's relaxing and antidepressant and whatever, and carminative. It helps with wind and sort of, you know, bloating and sort of spasms and tremors and stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, Mercury. Remember, Mercury, the symbol, the planet, is the messenger and is an amplifier. He'll amplify whatever he goes with, or it goes with, because Mercury is Mercury is androgynous. So Mercury is the original non-binary, you know, like it's like fully they, Mercury. It's like totally that. So I often think about, you know, the sort of new non-binary crew, like people who identify as non-binary now, they're fully like mercurial. Do you know what I mean? This whole movement is fully mercurial, which is fascinating. But yeah, so because obviously Mercury is said to be androgynous because it would sort of like it would sort of connect with different planets and change its nature with different planets, and would sort of like, as it rose before and then after the sun, which Venus did. But I don't know why Mercury was designated, because Venus wasn't said to change sex or gender. Mercury was. So I'll have to think about that, why Mercury was and Venus wasn't. But Mercury was the original androgyne. So a lot of the planets, some of the planets it was used. So I'm going somewhere with this. Licorice, for example, licorice root was assigned to be a mercurial plant. You think, huh, that's sweet and edible, and you know, why not Venus or something? And I think that was partly because, or largely probably because of its medicinal uses, in that it was seen in Chinese medicine as a messenger herb, like it potentiated the actions of other herbs and took them to all the places it needed to go in the body. They say in Chinese medicine that licorice enters all 13 main acupuncture channels or whatever, meridians. But then it's also, I don't know if there are 13, I'm not an acupuncturist, but I just remember reading it in a book and thinking, oh, that's interesting. But in the Western tradition, Mercury was used for things like diseases of the windpipe and to sort of soothe coughs, which sort of coughs were a sort of Mercury ruled illness. But yeah, it's a very interesting one. So as I say, Mercury is probably the most heterogeneous, as in diverse, group of plants, I'd say, in terms of the traditional sort of classifications. But you can play with those rulerships. So say something like that, there are some things which I can say very generically to help anyone who's interested in sort of playing with these classifications and observing them. So as we talked about, just think about the main sort of essential qualities of the planets, and think about what is the essential quality of this plant. So say Saturn, cold, dry, old, numbing, toxic, potentially, you know, sort of like can be heavy, like shade, growing in the shade, maybe like, so some plants, so you can sort of play with sort of those ideas. The more toxic plants generally belong to Saturn and Mars. Generally, there are one or two exceptions, but generally they'll end up on that end. If it's Jupiter, generally, again, there are exceptions, but most plants ruled by Jupiter would be completely harmless. They're going to be totally food grade. So things like milk thistle and bilberries and sage and what else, Jupiter. I'm trying to think of other agrimony. There are lots of the Jupiter plants are really, really food grade, really like totally harmless. I mean, nothing's totally harmless, but very, very unlikely to cause a problem. Your solar herbs, your sun herbs are somewhere in the middle. They're often like quite beneficial, but they can occasionally cause problems. So people can have allergies to chamomile, which is a solar herb. It's gentle, it's aromatic, but it's sometimes get allergies to it. Moon similarly, but lunar herbs are often sort of less conspicuous. Venus herbs often produce tasty fruit, and are again usually not harmless, but there are exceptions. Foxglove, Culpeper said foxglove was a herb of Venus, and he said it's the most harmless purge you could ever take. Well, of course it is if you throw up, do you know what I mean? But if you don't, you could die, so probably wouldn't recommend it. So that's one example of why you don't just lift things from tradition, like Culpeper said, ironically, you know, because he is now part of that tradition. Although I do have to say Culpeper is a great source for medicinal uses in general, but we don't now commonly use plants as purges in the same way that they did back then. So back then they were pretty gung-ho about giving huge doses of plants just to make you spew your guts up to get rid of a particular humor, and now we tend not to do that. So and I suspect that therapy was very, very effective because they sort of knew how to do it at the time, what doses to give and when to give them, whereas now we don't, so don't try.
Yeah, it's one way to detox.
Yeah.
The only experience I have of purging is taking my dog to the vet when he's ingested things that
Disagree.
were
Yeah,
not ingested, like currants from hot cross buns and being made.
Yeah, exactly. Dogs and cats do it for themselves though, don't they? They eat dog grass, or they'll eat, which incidentally, dog grass, couch grass, is a herb of Jupiter traditionally, which is a bit mad because you think it doesn't look very Jupitery. I mean, it spreads like crazy, and the rhizome does have a sort of bland, sweetish taste, and it is very food grade. But that is the plant that dogs and I think cats chew on to make themselves throw up.
I think I need a herd of them.
Well, interestingly, I mean, Culpeper said about couch grass, agripyron, the gardener's bane, that it was he said it was worth an acre of carrots twice told over because of its medicinal usefulness. And it
that in mind when I'm next wrestling with it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, but it's so that there are, as I said at the top of this, some plants are really easy to put in those boxes, and the main reason for putting them in those boxes is so that you can utilize them with an astrological system of prescribing or working with medicinal plants. I think that was the main reason. And maybe secondly, for something like a horary, say, I don't know, I'd have to think of some mad situation, like maybe you're a gardener running a herb stall and somebody's nicked a load of your plants and you want to know which plants have been stolen and where they've been taken. Well, maybe you'd need to know in that context which planet ruled which plant so you could find it in the chart. But I mean, it's a bit of a stretch. Yeah.
I have one further use for this, is in terms of working with transits, is finding the oils, the essential
yes, absolutely,
come from them, and meditating with them as sacred oils in order to perhaps have a better understanding of what an energy of a planet is asking of at a particular time.
That's really interesting.
And how to deal with different situations. So I think that this is the way in which we can use this is varied, and obviously in terms of your expertise of medical astrology, it's wonderful. But I also feel that in a more I guess mundane use, practical use, there are other things that we can be doing as enjoying our parties, etc. Just thinking about plants that suit us in a garden, that suit who we are as people, what we were attracted to. Why are we attracted to certain plants?
That's a whole interesting. Okay, there's two tangents I want to go down there, Anna. The first one is, do you have an example, like a story that you can say publicly on the internet of like using an oil for a meditation for a transit? Like,
Angelica, where the sun, in order to help get through winter, for instance.
Okay.
So because this is a sun based, it's a sun plant, and it's linked with Archangel Michael. And so if you are in need of lifting your spirits and perhaps having a boost in confidence, because the sun relates to our sense of self and confidence. If you've had a blow to your confidence, to bring Angelica in as a meditation. And it's not necessarily burning the oil. In fact, I would not burn the oil. I would simply put a few drops into a carrier oil, and my preferred personal carrier oil is rapeseed because it's so light.
Okay.
And odorless. And so just to place a few drops in that oil and then rub it into my hands and smell it.
Yeah.
Or perhaps rub a little bit, on the forehead, and just sit with that and allow that energy to come in. So that's an example. So you could use that perhaps when you're experiencing, as I say, needing a confidence boost.
Yes.
But also, if you're experiencing your own personal winter because you're going through a sun opposition to the sun,
yes.
or
yeah
your sun, and you just need that energy. And sunflowers, when we're feeling low, that a sunflower is just such a joy, and you can have pictures of sun.
Or like my neighbor grew one outside of her house last summer, and it just gave me such, the sun is the strongest planet in my chart. I've got sun in Aries. It's next to the South Node, so whatever, in the 6th house, so great. But still, take it where you can get it. And just the fact that she had like that sunflower right outside the front of her house, and therefore outside of mine, it gave me such joy every day to see this giant solar triffid outside the front. So
exactly. And you can collect the seeds and perhaps use the seeds more when you're feeling a little bit low, just to remind you of the sunflowers. I have sunflower seeds in my breakfast, in my porridge of a morning.
Well, I eat walnuts every day, which are also solar. So it's
so. And
the same.
When I'm putting these sunflower seeds in my breakfast, I'm remembering fields of sunflowers in southern Spain. So I go to southern Spain in my mind, and so there's all these things that we can do that are related to
they're evoking in different ways. You're using the plant, those rulerships, to evoke particular things. So if you have those rulerships, those correspondences, you can draw in different things. So knowing those symbolic connections, you can totally, I get that. That's fascinating. Thank you.
So we I think are discovering part 3 of our conversation.
There's a third. There was a second tangent I wanted to go down, but it's completely gone out of my head now. Because what was your question before we went on that one? Because before I asked you that question, you were saying,
I don't know.
I'd have to rewind the video. That's the problem with having two intuitive types talking. You sort of just go shoop 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 like all around these corners. But there was that. I think this is a subject that absolutely fascinates me. The sort of the correspondences and how you use them. And exactly as you said, it doesn't have to be just for designating or helping select medicine. You can use it equally for selecting sort of scents, even plants that you grow, things that you surround yourself with, in order to deliberately amplify or antidote things that are going on.
Fantastic. Well, Marcos, it's yes, I was really looking forward to our conversation, and
Likewise.
It's as ever absolutely fabulous. So thank you very, very much for your time.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you for talking to me.
And if people want to know more about your work, how do they find you?
Okay, thank you. Yes, well, there's my website, nocturnalherbalist.com, which is really mainly a booking website. You book me as a medical herbalist, but it's got a bit of info on there. And I've also got, I can't believe it, that my YouTube channel, which is very small, and I'm hardly ever finding time to post on it at the moment, but that is Nocturnal Herbalist as well, or The Nocturnal Herbalist on YouTube. I'm posting about every 4 months at the moment, but it is still slowly happening. And then the other places, if you're interested, I wrote a book on chocolate. Took me a long time. So if you're interested in that, there's a website called thesecretlifeofchocolate.com.
Wonderful. I've made it, and I will be putting everything into the description box accompanying this
Thank you.
interview. And so thank you all for watching. Next time, we're going to, I suppose, in some respects, stick with tradition, because we're going to be looking at a more historical perspective of astrology. And if you do want to learn more about astrology, there are two great things you can do. You can check out my website, because it's not too late to join a course I'm currently doing on transits of the inner planets and their cycles. And also, I will in September be, for those of you who are not exactly new to astrology but feel a little bit rusty, I'll be doing a course to refresh and revitalize your understanding of astrology. Until next time, goodbye.